If your purpose isn't right within your career, you can actually have that externally. It could be, volunteering or doing something. I think values have to be aligned, and if values are not aligned, then there is something that's going to be very, very disjointed. I mean, the emotional weight that will put on you with your values being aligned is going to be very, very hard for you in your career. So I do think values aligned. If you can get values aligned and the company also helps with the purpose of what you want to achieve, then you are on a winning streak.
Right.
But I do think the values align has to be 100%. If you can find an organization, because sometimes, let's be really honest, life happens and you can't get the both. And if you can find that elsewhere, then I think you should pursue.
Welcome to Sustainability Transformations podcast, where we discuss bold ideas to drive positive change for people, community, and business. And I'm so pleased today's guest is resilient, reinvented, and empowering. Marissa Hankinson is a C-suite executive turned entrepreneur and host of the Glass Ceiling podcast. After navigating redundancy in her 50s, she now helps others redefine success and purpose through bold career transformation. And the key goal of our discussion is looking at redundancy, reinvention, and reclaiming leadership identity and how to create purpose-driven impact after starting over. Thank you so much for joining, Marissa. Your story is a masterclass in navigating career upheaval with purpose. What was the moment everything changed for you after your redundancy?
I think I realized that the redundancy actually did me a favor. Interestingly enough, I was on a career path, was C-suite, but if I look back on the amount of time I was actually working, it was probably between 70 to 75 hours a week without necessarily me realizing that. I think having access to communication all the time, I was working in the building and construction industry. So even though my office hours would be, 8:30 till 5, I knew I had apprentices on site from 6 a.m. So my phone was going from 6 a.m. right the way through to, things maybe even fitting that they couldn't arrive on site the day after and things like that. So I was constantly attached to my phone, and that involved work and was not switching off. So to go from that level of working, and I had a great team underneath me, don't get me wrong, but that level of working to being made redundant and sitting going, what do I do with my time? Was a little bit of a shock to the system, not going to lie. I realized that I'd probably been putting my health and some things, self-care, on hold because I just didn't have the time for it. So all of a sudden being thrown into that redundancy, yes, it was a shock. Also, hang on a second, I am actually in my 50s and self-care, I can't keep going the way I am. So that was probably a huge catalyst. So I actually think it's done me a favor because I feel, I'm doing time for exercise, I'm taking self-care, and I'm still a little bit addicted to the hours working. I'm not going to lie, I like to keep myself very busy. But I feel like I've got a lot more of balance now.
Oh, that's great. It's always a good opportunity to hear the story, but can you tell it what was going on your mind in the days soon after losing the executive role?
I decided that I would give myself a week to be sad and grieve. And people say, "Run away." Everybody else usually takes 3 to 6 months. Marissa, you've got financial compensation for redundancy. You should take your time and think. And I realized that that's not me as a person. So for a week, and don't laugh when I say this, for a week I indulged in watching that female empowering movies and went for walks with lots and lots of friends for a chat and caught up with people that mean something to me, but I just didn't have the time. So my thing is sit on the sofa and indulge in your Erin Brockoviches and your Legally Blonde and all those kind of feel good films that you know what you can overcome some adversity.
Until you know you have to be strong. You might not know how strong you are. So it's an interesting journey for everyone to discover that. So thanks for sharing that.
I went to actually see a career counselor for a session. And at the start of the session, she was like, "What do you love about your job?" That I'd previously had. And I was like, "Oh, I love seeing the transformation of young people. You know, they come in as like a 17-year-old, 18-year-old apprentice, and they leave us at 22, and they've got a career and a trade and a profession that's going to sustain them for their life. That's really, really a good buzz for me. I love it." And then we dissected all that. And that's what I said when I started my career counseling, obviously. But at the end of it, I was like, "No, I hate it. I loved that little bit, but that little bit was only 1% of what I did. And I hated all the compliance and the governance and the safety and all these things." So I realized that wasn't what I was meant to be doing. So it was a really interesting task. So I definitely think sometimes going to see a career counselor and talking some things through where you think you want to be may not be where you want to be.
Always good to have a different perspective. Previous counseling sessions or coaching is interesting hearing myself back, things that is actually coming from my mind or what I'm thinking about. I can even reflect and think. It's always good speaking things out from what you're actually thinking. You feel your experience played a role in the decision, and how did that affect your confidence?
Did actually think it was time. Interestingly enough, I think it was time for me to leave the role. So it did push me into leaving that role. I think that the organization I was working for wanted to achieve some things, and I'd been in that organization for about 10 years. And I think that I don't necessarily think we realize it sometimes, but I think I was a barrier to their next growth without necessarily realizing it. And I think since I left, I think really, really doing that inner work on yourself, I've realized that maybe I was a barrier and it was the right decision for the organization for me, actually. What I was concerned about was I do think there is an element of ageism when you are applying for a role. I know that's not really allowed as such. But for me, one of my passions is marketing and what I do. But I felt that there was an element of in my face and I wouldn't understand some of the newer technologies or the new social media trends and things where I felt I was very much abreast of all that. And even though I was at the C-suite and I had a team that did the implementation for me, I think my age in some respects actually went against me. So I definitely think there was a perception of it. So it did impact my confidence.
It's such a shame with how some of these experiences come about. Now, perhaps before we explore further, there has been a lot of layoffs from tech companies, and with the AI coming in, just to highlight how important listeners may benefit from your insight, where there is a lot of transformation in the job market going on, where 5 years ago, where it was guaranteed if you were a programmer, you went to university and you came out, it was guaranteed, or not guaranteed, but you have a good chance. But now there's been lots and lots of layoff. And if the hype with AI is going to be true, where there's going to be between estimates show between 15 to 20 trillion dollars of net income, which means with that increase, there's going to be some unfortunate job losses. And so I'm highlighting that going forward, there might be some very difficult times where people can learn from how to maybe retrain or find new skills and so on. So, having shared that key context, how did your identity shift as you went from a C-suite title into starting all over again?
I think from my side of it, I think it's really, really important that it does not matter where you are in your actual career. I think that it is always very, very important to always invest in yourself and your personal development. And so even when I was recruiting the people, I would always ask them, what are you doing to improve yourself? What is what have you done to develop yourself in the last 3, 6, 12 months? Because that really, even when I was in the recruiting process, that would really show me who they were as a person, who they valued themselves as a person. Were they a self-starter? There was a lot of things that showed me in that interview question that made me see if they were someone that was good for my team, but also could they bring something to my organization? So I've always done, and I think, you just talk about someone being a programmer, etc. You have to develop yourself for yourself, not because the organization sends you on a course, because they're the things that are going to make you stand out in the job market. So yes, we talk about AI replacing jobs. I always think that it's not necessarily AI that's going to replace your job. And I'm going to quote a good friend of mine, Edward Dean. His quote is, it's going to be somebody who knows how to work with AI effectively and efficiently that's going to take your job, not the other way around. If people keep blaming AI, and it's not going to be a like for a like. It's not going to be your programmer, it's going to be replaced by an AI doing the programming. It's going to be somebody else who knows how to utilize AI, can increase the productivity, efficiency, etc., for better output, who is going to replace your job. So you have to make the choice of whether you're going to embrace it and learn it and work with it, or are you going to stay complacent and blame AI? I think you have to take a little bit of ownership for yourself.
I think some people get comfortable in their jobs, and those people who are comfortable in their jobs are the ones that may be at risk of not upgrading, because the alarm bells have been rung now way before the fire is about to start. So, starting those skills, there is lots of affordable courses online. A lot of these companies are providing free courses or readily available courses. And yeah, so the earlier individuals take personal responsibility, because yes, ideally we want the companies who would benefit from it provide training as much as possible. Yeah, that individual responsibility of upgrading so that you can stand out from the. Okay, so how do you discover about yourself during that in-between phase of not knowing what's next? Or in other words, how do you gain that clarity in the midst of so much uncertainty?
There's one good thing, and I'm very humble in this. When you're made, sometimes I was made redundant in my 50s, and what I will say is that I was very fortunate in that my financial position that I was in was very comfortable. So I didn't necessarily have some of the other pressures or the uncertainties. I took a massive hit to my confidence and realized that I didn't necessarily want to work in the industry that I'd come from, which was significant uncertainty. Realized then that this sounds so bad, is that I was over managing people. I was like, seriously, I know that you're in the UK and we're here in Australia, but the last 12 months, last 18 months here in Australia, we've had the most work changes. And it is so hard to keep up to date with them, to manage. And it was just becoming a huge burden. So all that uncertainty, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, literally, I sat there and I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't, I'm 52. Do I want to learn a new industry? 100% believe that everybody has transferable skills that can be acknowledged and can be adapted. I'm very much a believer of that. I didn't know where I wanted to go. And that was where initially, and you mentioned the glass ceiling, I didn't get to the top role, the CEO role. I was a female in a male dominated industry, but I didn't hit that job. And so that's where the glass ceiling podcast came from, because it was a moment of uncertainty for me and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna learn from other people who have done more than me. So let me start this podcast. And it was for no other reason. It was for me to have a learning exercise to see where I wanted to go. And that was literally the first season of the glass ceiling. It was getting people in who were female, who'd broken that glass ceiling, who'd achieved something that I haven't managed to achieve. And what was that going to teach me? That's literally where it came from. So there was a lot of uncertainty during that time. However, organically, I founded a media production company. So that was organically helped me find where I needed to find, but I wasn't actively looking for it.
Well, that's so good where you're able to find that key opportunity. So, what inspired you to launch it? I know you discovered it, but what really inspired you to launch it, and what fears did you have stepping into the unknown?
So I've been involved in podcasting before in my previous role. So during obviously COVID, we don't like that word, but it's still around and it's still here. We had to do things differently. So the organization that I was involved in had a lot of corporate partnerships, was very an event driven, getting to our customer basics. And when COVID hit, people were like, well, events aren't running and corporate partnership were potentially going to retract their money that they gave us as an organization. So we really had to think, one, we had to do a huge re-education to those partners that it wasn't just an event, it was a 12-month campaign. They talk to our customer base on a regular basis. There's other ways. And we actually did podcasting as a way to replace events, but still have a strong communication to our customer base, our audience. So that helped with that. So I did have experience in it, but the launching of it as a host and tapping people on my network on the shoulder to ask them to be guests when I wasn't in that C-suite position, I didn't know whether they would be open to that. I did feel that a lot of my relationships and network were attached to my role. What I've realized is actually they're attached to me and attached to my investment in those relationships that I've sustained. So I did have a little bit of a identity crisis, I'm not going to lie, and I was very, very uncomfortable. But I actually found that if I embraced that vulnerability and was authentic, I got what I needed to get, really. And what I had realized, and one of my biggest learnings over the last probably 12 to 18 months, is um, I was in a male dominated area as a C-suite executive. I carry I drop that mask now and feel comfortable in dropping the mask. And I've realized that I'm achieving more by showing vulnerability and being a little bit more of my authentic and what people expected me to be.
Yeah, that's a very deep one. So, if I can explore on the mask, what do you think can, what do you think people have to be mindful of to not pick that mask? Pick the mask of survival or mask of trying to be like the environment. What are some of the tips or advice would you give? Because sometimes it's a mask where you just pick it up all of a sudden. But I've discovered personally some of the mask you pick it over time and you don't even realize it. So I'm curious to know how people or what advice you would give so people can be comfortable with who they are.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think I got the corporate mask was definitely around protection for me. You know, I had to sometimes with some of the decisions, or if you're dismissing staff, or there are issues around, I'd say definitely it's around HR that sometimes you have to put a significant boundary in place because you want to protect you and your organization. So even though you may be feeling very, very differently, emotionally about that situation that you may be dealing with, it's very hard. You can't show that sometimes. You try to have empathy, but at the end of the day, the decision is going to be made and you've got to stick with it. So I think it does, I 100% agree with you, it does build up over time. But I think and this sounds really weird, and I don't want to say it's woo-woo because I'm not the person. Um, if if you've made a decision and something is not sitting with you, or when you're alone at night and you've dealt with, and I'm talking really around people, dealing with people, and something's not sitting right with you in your gut. Now, obviously, you have to protect yourself, but I found that I started to go back to people. If I felt that I had been too harsh with them, or they may have just caught me at that wrong time and I may have been dismissive, etc., is to actually acknowledge that and go back to them and say, and make time and apologize. But I didn't do that enough. And upon reflection, I should have done. So I think that you're the only person that can acknowledge that mess and listen to your gut. And if you can make a correction, and it's very hard to make a correction because it could mean that you're actually owning up to an error. Then
Purpose is a big word within organizations. Some Uh, some experts or people have shared that some of the causes of burnout, if people don't have purpose or if their purpose doesn't align with the company's purpose, it can have some fundamental challenges. So I'm curious to know, what does purpose mean to you now compared to your years in the corporate leadership?
I think you've got to, people say it's purpose, and I agree. And sometimes within my career, I've had my purpose somewhere else. And I know that sounds a bit odd, but for me, having purpose, if your purpose isn't right within your career, you can actually have that externally. It could be, volunteering or doing something. I think values have to be aligned. And if values are not aligned, then there is something that's going to be very, very disjointed. I mean, the emotional weight that will put on you with your values being aligned is going to be very, very hard for you in your career. So I do think values aligned. If you can get values aligned and the company also helps with the purpose of what you want to achieve, then you are on a winning streak. But I do think the values aligned has to be 100%. If you can find an organization, because sometimes, let's be really honest, life happens and you can't get the both. And if you can find that elsewhere, then I think you should pursue. So I've always done volunteering. But the values alignment is the emotional term now.
After 13 years in Australia, do you feel like you found your people, or are there still cultural shifts you are navigating around?
Definitely have some. Adelaide is a really feeling. When I came here, I come from the UK. We have a significant population in the UK. When I came to Adelaide, it is definitely not, is it the 6 degrees of separation, 7 degrees of separation? I can't think of what the word is. That is not what it's like here in Adelaide. Adelaide is 3 degrees of separation. Everybody will know everybody. At some point, it's a very, very strange phenomenon, and I come from the UK, and here in Adelaide, it's very hard to get into some of those relationships and networks because there's this weird thing, are you ready? That people ask people where they went to school, right? Where you went to school determines so much in Adelaide. The whole of South Australia, which is bigger than the UK, is only 1.8 million people. It's bigger than the UK, more so. So they have this thing, and there's a lot of private schools here and things like that. So there's a lot of this alumni networks. And I 100% go, you know what? I'm not from Adelaide. I'm from the UK. I do have a tribe of Pommies or the UK because there is a synergy of, and you've moved from a different country. There's this whole synergy of you got here, you had the struggles, you applied for there's all this instant bonding. So yes, I do have a group of people who are from the UK, or people who have migrated to Australia. You definitely have instant connection. You can break that down. So for me, I've got some phenomenal relationships. I've definitely found my tribe, and they're very different tribes that I've got. I definitely think it's important not to think that one group of people can give you everything. Because I don't think that's the case, but I have got my roots and I go to them for different reasons. I'm very, very fortunate. And when you come to a new country, don't say no to things because they will stop asking.
Yeah.
That's my tip. Say yes and then work it out if it's right for you. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, be open-minded, explore, try and find out in your own way. What advice would you give to someone right now facing redundancy or feeling past their prime?
I would say don't necessarily look at what you have done, but really do an assessment of the skills that you've got. I think it's really important. It's very, very different approach. I think sometimes it's really easy to go, well, I've been in this role. This is my next step in my career. It doesn't have to be like that. And to look internally at what is going to make you happy or what you want, not necessarily what society's expectation of you is. So I was the chief operating officer, so you would think that a CEO would be my next career pathway. And I looked internally and I went, that's not what I want. So I think putting the expectation of what people expect on your resume to the side and look at your skills and your transfer and what you can do, especially at the age that we're at, is what you can do that can make a difference. And if you're in a situation where finances are not like the 100% driver for you, like as in a salary, then really, really look at what is going to be meaningful to you.
What's your final thoughts for listeners, whether they are changing career or changing industry or moving from the corporate world into entrepreneurship or trying something new?
I would say that doing it alone is too hard. And I'm not necessarily going into partnership or directorship. I'm very, very fortunate with what I've set up. I've got a great business partner. But I think it's really, really important that you have people around you. Now, we're really, really fortunate here. We have a lot of government schemes that help with mentoring and coaching and can give you that guidance when you're starting on a path on your own. But even if it's within your network, talking to people and not necessarily, and this sounds really bad, but not necessarily friends and family. I'm talking about business connections or people that you may admire, because your friends and family may not say the things that you really need to hear. So sometimes getting that other perspective is important. So look out for those grants, look out for free mentoring or coaching, and really surround yourself, because it can be really, really isolating and lonely, but there is actually help out there. And there's a lot of help. And even if you ask, you'd be surprised what you can get.
A huge thank you to Marissa for blessing us with your time, but incredible insight. If listeners like what we've discussed and want to find more about your work, where can they find more about your work, Marissa?
I'm definitely on LinkedIn. I absolutely love LinkedIn. It's my favorite form. I love connecting with people. So you can find me, Marissa Hankinson. I'm very fortunate that my profile is my name too, so none of those fancy numbers. And then if you want to check out Wavebreaker Productions, you can pop that into Google and you can see the podcasts and other things that we can produce as well, and might give you a little bit of inspiration on your journey.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Marissa.
No worries.